My name is Sophie Palmer, a 34-year-old financial consultant living in Chicago. The last 3 weeks have been a whirlwind, to say the least. My father passed away after a long battle with cancer, and in his wake, he left not just a business empire, but a complex web of relationships. Relationships tainted by manipulation, resentment, and deceit. The worst of it? My stepmother, Diane. I had always known she didn't like me. From the moment my father married her 5 years ago, she began her slow campaign to isolate him from everyone who truly mattered to him, especially me. But my father was no fool. He saw right through Diane's charm and manipulations, and he had prepared for what was coming. As I sat in my apartment looking at the phone, Diane's call still echoed in my mind. Her words dripped with venom. "We're taking our rightful share of your dad's inheritance. Get out of the house." I felt a rush of anger, but I kept my voice steady. "Talk to my lawyer," I replied, and then ended the call. What Diane didn't know was that my father had already seen through her. In his last months, when his health was failing and his body frail, he and I had spent hours talking about the estate. My father's meticulous nature meant that every detail of his will was ironclad, and more importantly, everything was legally secured in my name. Diane had no idea what she was up against. For years, she had tried to control every aspect of my father's life. She isolated him, spent his money on extravagant luxuries, and made sure I was kept at arm's length. I had watched it all with growing concern, but what Diane didn't know was that my father had already taken steps to protect me, his true heir. I was his legacy, and he was determined to ensure that Diane would not have access to his hard-earned empire. The next morning, I met with Richard, my father's longtime lawyer, in his office. His face was grim, but there was determination behind his eyes. "Sophie, Diane's lawyer called last night. They're planning to contest the will," Richard said as he shuffled through some papers. "They're claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made those changes." I felt my stomach churn. Diane had always underestimated my father's foresight. He had prepared for this. Not only did he have legal documentation, but he had also recorded videos explaining every decision with clear reasoning, anticipating this very moment. The battle for the inheritance had just begun. But Diane, of course, wasn't going to let go easily. The following days were filled with tension. Diane's lawyer, a slick, sharp man who specialized in manipulating legal loopholes, presented a feigned image of Diane as the grieving widow. She was trying to portray herself as the devoted wife who'd spent years caring for my father, while I, the manipulative daughter, had taken advantage of a dying man. At the courthouse, Diane's smirk didn't fade as we all waited for the judge. She sat there, surrounded by her adult children, undoubtedly hoping to sway the court in her favor. I sat across the aisle, calm but resolute. This would not be easy, but it was necessary. When the trial began, Diane's lawyer went on the offensive. He painted me as the manipulative daughter who had been taking advantage of my father's declining health, and Diane as the loyal wife who had sacrificed everything for him. He even claimed that my father's mental state had been compromised by his illness and medication. But then Richard stood up. His calm presence was a stark contrast to Diane's lawyer's theatrics. "Your Honor, I have evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mr. Palmer was in full possession of his faculties when he made these decisions," Richard said, as he presented the video footage. My father's voice filled the room. His words were clear, strong, and decisive. "I am making these changes to my will of sound mind and body," my father said in the video. "My daughter Sophie is the rightful heir to my estate. My wife Diane has been provided for adequately through her prenuptial agreement. The business and family home belong to my daughter." Diane's face faltered. Her smug expression started to crack, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. I was watching her fall apart in real time. The case continued, and more evidence was presented, including medical evaluations and surveillance footage that showed Diane going through my father's financial documents late at night. She had attempted to transfer large sums of money from my father's accounts in the weeks leading up to his death. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense figure, was fully engaged now. "Mrs. Palmer," he said, turning to Diane as the evidence piled up, "you've attempted to manipulate not only your husband, but also his estate. This will not be tolerated." The courtroom fell into an eerie silence as the final piece of evidence was presented, a video my father had made just 2 weeks before his death, where he explicitly discussed his concerns about Diane's behavior. "You will not win this," my father's recorded voice echoed. "Sophie is my daughter, and she is the rightful heir. Diane is only interested in my money." Diane, now completely exposed, lost her composure. She stood up, shouting, "I deserve that house. I was his wife." But the judge's voice was sharp. "Mrs. Palmer, sit down. Your outburst is not helping your case." I could feel the tension in the room as Diane's carefully constructed image of the grieving widow shattered completely. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. Deb. When the judge issued his ruling, I held my breath. Diane had no case left. She had manipulated and schemed, but in the end, the law was on my side. My father's wishes would be upheld and the estate would be mine. But what came next was even more satisfying. The judge ordered a full audit of Diane's financial activities during her marriage to my father. The investigation revealed that she had attempted to transfer nearly $300,000 from my father's accounts just days before his death. The police got involved, and the weight of her deceit finally caught up to her. Diane's legal team packed up quickly, knowing they had lost. She left the courthouse, defeated and humiliated. The game was over. What? 2 weeks later, Diane returned to the house, escorted by lawyers, to collect her personal belongings. She had tried to claim items that weren't hers, including family heirlooms that belonged to my mother. But with Richard's help, every attempt was thwarted. She was left with little. As I stood there watching Diane leave for the final time, a sense of closure washed over me. My father's legacy was safe, and I had protected it. I had stood up to Diane and ensured that the truth would prevail. The business continued to thrive under my leadership. I expanded it, made it my own, and established a scholarship program in my father's name to help young people in real estate. One day, I received an unexpected call from Thomas, Diane's son. He apologized, acknowledging the wrongs his mother had done and the harm she had caused. It was an unexpected gesture, but it brought me a sense of peace. Even Diane's own children had seen through her act. As I sat in my father's study, now my study, looking at the photo of us together, I realized that the real victory wasn't just in keeping the estate. It was in honoring my father's legacy. I had done what he always wanted, to keep the business thriving while maintaining integrity. The house, the business, and the memories, they were all part of my father's legacy, and now they were mine to carry forward. In the weeks that followed the hearing, I found myself slowly adjusting to my new reality. The house, once filled with tension and bitterness from Diane's presence, now felt like a place of peace. Diane's belongings had been packed away, and with each passing day, the weight of her manipulations seemed to lift. As I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar objects my father had surrounded himself with over the years, I could feel the comforting presence of his legacy. It was strange, almost surreal, but the feeling of triumph came not from the legal victory alone. It came from the fact that, despite everything Diane had thrown at me, I had stood firm. I had honored my father's wishes and ensured that his hard work, his values, and his empire would not be lost to someone who only saw it as a means to an end. The days blended into each other as I buried myself in the work my father had left behind. Running the business wasn't easy. The decisions, the weight of it all, were overwhelming at times. But I had grown into this role over the years. It was my birthright, my responsibility, and now it was my honor. But despite the success, I often found myself thinking about the life I had built with my father. The late-night conversations in his office, the lessons he had imparted to me about business, about integrity, about life. He had always said that success wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about maintaining your dignity and your values along the way. Then one day, just as I was preparing for a major meeting with some investors, I received a call from Richard. His voice was strained, a far cry from the calm reassurance he usually carried. "Sophie, there's something you need to know." I froze. "What is it?" "It's about Diane," he said, his words hanging heavily in the air. "There's been a new development. She's not done yet." I felt my heart drop. After everything, I thought she was finished. But Diane, like a wounded animal, refused to go quietly. "She's been reaching out to some of your father's old contacts," Richard explained. "She's trying to rally support, paint herself as the victim. It seems she's got some tricks up her sleeve. She's even trying to get into the media to tell her side of the story." I clenched my fists. "She's delusional. She's lost. What can she possibly gain at this point?" "She's trying to appeal to the public," Richard replied. "She's crafting a narrative, and she's not alone. I've noticed some troubling figures from your father's past circling around her. There's more at play here than we realized. I knew then that Diane wouldn't give up. But what I didn't know was how deep her lies had gone. She had been a master manipulator, always calculating, always a step ahead. I had underestimated how far she was willing to go to win. I had to stop her, once and for all. Hmm. Over the next few weeks, I dove headfirst into action. Richard and I began preparing for the next wave of the fight, gathering evidence, and reaching out to key people who had been in my father's life. There were still some loose ends, some legal gray areas that Diane might try to exploit. Meanwhile, Diane's media campaign gained momentum. She gave interviews to tabloids, presenting herself as the wronged wife, the woman who had been cheated out of her fair share of the inheritance. She painted me as a cold-hearted daughter, bent on taking everything from her. She even started leaking selective footage from the hearing, trying to twist the narrative in her favor. I couldn't let her win. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about integrity, about making sure that my father's name wasn't dragged through the mud by someone who had never truly cared for him. I decided it was time to fight fire with fire. I contacted a reporter I had worked with in the past, someone who understood the importance of getting the full truth out. Together, we devised a plan to reveal the full extent of Diane's deceit to the public, to show everyone who she truly was. Through a combination of well-placed interviews and legal pressure, we unearthed more of Diane's manipulations. The surveillance footage that had been used in court was just the tip of the iceberg. We dug deeper into her history, her previous marriages, her financial schemes, and most notably, her attempts to siphon money from my father's accounts in the final days of his life. One morning, as I prepared for another meeting, I received a call from the reporter. "We've got it," she said, excitement in her voice. "We've got everything. We're running the story today." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. The truth would finally be known, and Diane would have nowhere left to hide. The story hit the news like a bombshell. Diane's world of manipulation and lies came crashing down in front of the entire public. The evidence we had gathered, her financial schemes, the lies about her role in my father's life, and her audacious attempts to steal from him, was all laid bare for everyone to see. The public reaction was swift. Diane's credibility evaporated in an instant. Her carefully crafted image of the grieving widow was shattered. And when the authorities caught wind of the extent of her financial misconduct, an investigation was launched. Diane was officially being charged with fraud and attempted theft, and this time she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. As the dust settled, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Diane was gone from our lives, but the battle had taken its toll. The business was thriving, yes, but I had lost something too, the father I had spent so many years with, building our legacy together. But I also realized that through everything, I had grown stronger. My father had prepared me for this moment, and in the end, it was not just about taking what was rightfully mine. It was about preserving his legacy and the values he had taught me. I stood in my father's office one last time, looking at the photos on the wall, the records on the desk. It felt like everything was coming full circle. The business was in good hands now, my hands, and I had a plan for the future, a future that would honor my father's vision, a future built on integrity and honesty. Diane had lost, but I had won something much more important. I had won the right to carry my father's legacy forward, to build upon what he had started, and to do it on my own terms. And now I would make sure that his name would live on, just as he had always intended. This segment continues the dramatic arc and lays the foundation for closure. Let me know if you'd like to expand on any specific aspects or add further tension and twists. A few weeks after the public exposure, I thought things had finally calmed down. Diane was out of the picture and the media frenzy had died down. But as I settled into the rhythm of running the business, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at my office one morning, addressed to me in a familiar handwriting. My heart skipped a beat. The letter was from my father, or more precisely, from Richard. He had been entrusted with so much of my father's final words, and now, even after everything that had transpired, there was more to discover. Opening it slowly, I could hear my father's voice in my mind, the calm assurance that had guided me throughout this journey. Inside, there was a short message. "Sophie, there's one more thing I need you to understand. Diane was never the only one who could manipulate. There's a bigger game at play. Don't trust everyone around you. Your next move will require more than just evidence. It will require you to outthink the people who thought they could control you. My blood ran cold. I thought I had outsmarted Diane, that the fight was over. But clearly, I had missed something. A sinking feeling took hold of me as I reread those words. I sat back, trying to process the reality that my father had, in his final days, prepared me for something bigger than I could have imagined. Diane was just one piece in a much more complex puzzle, and now I needed to unravel it. Yeah. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. My phone rang one evening, an unknown number flashing on the screen. When I answered, a voice I didn't recognize greeted me. "I know what you did, Sophie." I froze. The voice was smooth, too smooth. It didn't sound like any of my father's business associates or anyone I had been in contact with, but somehow it felt familiar. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You don't know me, but I know you. I know what your father was preparing, and I also know that you're not out of danger yet. I suggest you be careful. There are others involved, people who have a lot more to lose than Diane ever did." The call ended abruptly. I sat there for a long time, my mind racing. Who was this? What did they mean by others? Could this be someone who was working behind the scenes, pulling strings and orchestrating events in the shadows? I couldn't just ignore the call. There was no way that this was a coincidence. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Richard was the first person I turned to. I explained everything about the call, the warning, my father's letter. His face darkened, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Sophie, I've been afraid of this," he said gravely. "Your father's business wasn't just a series of investments. It was a part of something much larger, something tied to old dealings and dangerous people. He may have prepared you for Diane, but there were always people looking at the bigger picture." I sat in stunned silence, trying to digest what he was saying. The truth was, I had never fully understood how deep my father's influence had run. How could I have missed this? What other dark secrets had he been keeping from me? Richard continued, his voice steady. "There's a group, Sophie, a powerful group that your father had dealings with. They don't take kindly to anyone messing with their plans, and they don't care if you're his daughter. You need to be careful, and you need to act fast." I could feel my pulse quicken. This was no longer just about securing my father's legacy. This was about survival. Bleh. Richard and I began gathering all the documents and evidence we could find. Everything from my father's business dealings to his past relationships with certain figures. The deeper we dug, the more we realized how intricately tied my father had been to a network of powerful individuals, some of whom had never been mentioned in public. And then one evening, as I sat in my office, a figure walked into the room unannounced. A tall man wearing a dark suit and sunglasses stood in the doorway. He exuded a dangerous calm, the kind of confidence you only see in people who are accustomed to getting their way. "I think it's time we talk, Miss Palmer," he said, his voice cold and calculated. I stood up immediately, ready for anything. "Who are you?" "My name is Jack, and you're in over your head. This has never been about Diane or your father's will. It's always been about us, the ones who control the real power. Your father may have outsmarted Diane, but now you've caught our attention." The walls seemed to close in as his words sank in. This was it, the confrontation I had been unknowingly heading towards. "You've made a lot of enemies, Sophie," Jack continued, stepping forward. "But you can still walk away. Just hand over everything, and we'll leave you alone." I felt a surge of anger. "I'm not giving up what's mine. My father left me this for a reason. I won't let you take it." Jack smiled darkly. "I admire your courage, but let's see how far that takes you." What followed next was a whirlwind of chaos. The people Jack had referred to, the ones who controlled everything, were not just business associates. They were powerful figures who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes for years. And the shocking part, one of them was someone I had trusted for years, someone close to me. Richard. He had known all along about the group's influence. He had been working with them, feeding them information about my father's plans and the inheritance. The betrayal hit me harder than I could have imagined. Richard, my father's old friend, had been playing both sides the entire time. "Richard!" I screamed, confronting him as the pieces finally fell into place. "You were with them the whole time?" He looked at me with a hollow expression. "It was never personal, Sophie. It was business." The final betrayal shattered me. My father's closest ally had sold us out, And now I was left with nothing but the weight of his deception. But I wasn't done yet. Uma. When I discovered that Richard had betrayed me, I felt a deep, sharp pain stab through my chest, followed by an overwhelming sense of disappointment. I had trusted him, worked alongside him, and relied on his guidance, but now everything felt like it had been built on a foundation of lies. For a moment, I thought I would never be able to forgive him. But as the anger began to subside, something else emerged. It wasn't bitterness, it was sympathy. I couldn't ignore the fact that Richard had been integral to my father's success. He had helped build this empire from the ground up, and I owed him part of what I had today. But seeing how greed had clouded his judgment, how it had pushed him to abandon the values we had all worked so hard to uphold, I couldn't accept it. Not from him, not from anyone. Not. I found him in his office later that day, his face tired and weary, as though he had been expecting this moment. I walked in without hesitation, my steps firm, but my heart heavy. "Richard, I know you're not a bad person," I started, my voice steady, though I couldn't hide the sadness. "But what you've done, it really disappoints me. You know what my father built, and you know how we stood together. But because of personal gain, you allowed yourself to be blinded, going against everything my father taught us." He looked at me, his face pale, eyes filled with shame. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at his hands, which were trembling slightly. He had no defense. "I never thought I'd end up here, Sophie," he said, his voice breaking. "I tried to do everything right, but in business, sometimes I lost myself. And then I just wanted to keep everything." I could feel the weight of his regret, and though it hurt, I remained calm. I couldn't let his mistakes drag me down too. "You don't understand, Richard," I said, my tone soft but firm. "My father taught me that no matter the circumstances, honesty and conscience should always come first. You're not a bad person, but I believe you've forgotten the most important thing in life: family and real values." Richard lowered his gaze, and I could see the pain in his eyes. He was broken, and perhaps for the first time, he truly understood the depth of what he had done. "I didn't know how to fix this, Sophie. I got caught up in money and status. I just saw the numbers in the shortest path, and I lost myself." I sighed, feeling an unexpected pity for him. "Richard, not everything can be measured by profit, and you can still start over. You can step back, reassess, and make things right. It's not too late. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for things that aren't worth it." I could see the change in him. His eyes softened, the weight of guilt still heavy but mixed with relief. It was almost as if my words had lifted a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. "You're right, Sophie," he said, looking up at me with a new light in his eyes. "I lost my I'll step back. I'll start over, and I'll do everything the right way, just like your father taught me." I nodded, feeling a sense of resolution settle in me. "That's the right decision, Richard. You don't need to face too high a price, but you have to do it right." Richard decided to step back from the financial mess he had created. His decision wasn't followed by severe consequences. He wasn't punished or taken to court, but the shift in him was profound. He walked away from the shady dealings and returned to the values he had once abandoned: honesty, integrity, and respect for the legacy my father had built. He didn't try to fight or justify his actions any longer. Instead, he began rebuilding, this time with a clear conscience, caring for the company in a more honest and sustainable way. I saw him start to repair the relationships he had damaged, including with the staff and clients he had once manipulated. In the end, even though the past could not be changed, Richard learned that integrity, honesty, and conscience were the true measures of success. He didn't seek redemption in the traditional sense, but in the way he chose to live moving forward. He continued working, but now without the blindness of ambition and greed, finally understanding that sometimes the best way to find peace is by doing things the right way, no matter how difficult it may seem. I stood in front of Jack and his crew, my eyes sharp and unwavering. I knew this wasn't just a battle over inheritance. This was about establishing my position in a world I had worked so hard to build. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and began. "Jack, I've witnessed the deceit, the manipulation, and all the shady tricks you've played over the past few months. But what you don't understand is I am not some naive girl you can fool or easily defeat. I've worked in finance for years, helping build multi-million-dollar projects, and I don't need anyone to protect me. I took a step closer, locking eyes with him and everyone around us. You might see me as a helpless daughter, a powerless heir, but in this world, I know how to control it. I've learned from my father, and I know how to protect what's mine, what I love. I'm not afraid to face you. You might pretend to be successful, but I have the real skills to keep everything I deserve. I waved a document in the air. I have clear evidence of all your shady moves. I've invested in numerous companies, been part of major deals, and I know how to make people take me seriously. If you don't want to see worse things unfold, I suggest you be careful. These games won't end well for you. Every word I spoke was a direct challenge, a warning. Jack and his crew couldn't help but feel the shift in the air. They exchanged nervous glances, realizing that I wasn't just the daughter to protect. I was a formidable competitor in the business world. And in that moment, they understood that any move they made would come with a fight they wouldn't win. So I won't let you ruin my work any longer. And just so you know, if you keep trying to mess with me, you will pay the price. I am not someone you can easily beat. I turned and walked away confidently, leaving Jack and his crew in stunned silence. They knew deep down that from now on, I was a force to be reckoned with, someone they couldn't afford to underestimate. I sat at my desk in the company office, a vast space that I had once helped my father build. Now it was not only a place to keep memories, but also where I had to continue growing, turning it into an empire of my own. Things were gradually changing, and I was determined not just to maintain it, but to take the company to new heights. We need to expand into international markets, I said to the leadership team sitting in front of me, my gaze unwavering. We can't just stop here. The opportunity to enter new regions is massive, especially since we have a solid financial foundation and a reputable brand. The faces in the room exchanged glances, not because they disagreed, but because they realized I wasn't just an heir. I was a skilled leader. I understood strategy, managed cash flow, and knew how to maximize the company's advantages. I pointed out opportunities in related industries, such as commercial real estate and infrastructure development in emerging markets. We're not just going to focus on residential real estate, but we'll branch out into industrial zones and infrastructure projects. Investing in these areas will help us double the company's value in 3 years. I decided to hire a team of international experts, from strategic consultants to top-tier professionals in the real estate sector, to seize this growth opportunity quickly and precisely. Every strategy I introduced was groundbreaking and full of conviction. But it wasn't just about expansion. I also wanted to preserve the family values my father had built. I started implementing charitable projects, establishing a foundation to support education for underprivileged children and students as a way to give back to the community and enhance the company's reputation. We are not just a profit-driven business. We must also contribute to society, I declared when presenting the plan. Step by step, my company flourished, overcoming the challenges left by my father. Meetings with partners and major negotiations became tools for me to assert my authority, not only as an heir, but also as a powerful female leader. When the company secured a major contract with an international conglomerate, I knew I had achieved what others hadn't thought possible. Industry competitors, those who once saw me as an inexperienced girl, now had to bow their heads in respect. I had not only enriched my father's company, but also built my own empire, not just in terms of wealth, but with the respect and power in the industry. I had proven that a combination of intelligence, decisiveness, and determination would allow me to lead the company even further. What do you think about Sophie's powerful stand? Do you believe her actions will change the course of the battle with Jack and his team? Have you ever had to take a strong stance to protect what you've worked hard for? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting stories. I'd love to hear your opinions and continue the conversation with all of you.